Okay, hello again, everybody, and welcome back. Getting close to the end of the semester. Only have 2 more chapters left to go, so we're here at the end. I can't believe it's gone so quickly. Chapter 17 is all about the government and the legal issues and compensation. And being a lawyer, obviously I love this chapter because, again, it talks about all the legal aspects. This is the type of stuff that I tend to deal with on a daily basis in my job, in addition to all the total rewards and other compensation things that we've talked about throughout the semester. So, government is actually a part of the employment relationship. And again, we're not here to talk about politics, whether or not you're the type of person who believes government should be more involved in jobs or less involved. That's your own personal politics. But the government does play a part in the employment relationship. It's, helping set things as far as pay, unemployment insurance, protecting employees from exploitation. The government does play a role in that. And we're going to kind of talk about what that looks like. So for the next couple of slides, you're going to see kind of the major employment federal pay regulations that have been going on since the early 1930s. And I've put a red star next to the ones that I feel like are the most important. And the ones with the red star, those are the only ones that I would actually put on an exam. So if there's not a red star next to it, you need to know about it, but I won't put it on an exam. The Fair Labor Standards Act, we talked a little bit about that earlier in the semester. It was the rule that sets minimum wage. So all the minimum wage laws that we have now are a requirement under the FLSA. It talks about hours worked overtime, and it prohibits child labor. So if you work more than 40 hours and you're a non-exempt employee, and we'll talk about what that means, you get overtime based on the FLSA. It also prevents having a 10-year-old child work 50 hours a week. We've heard horror stories about early on in American history when children were exploited for working in coal mines and working in very dangerous jobs. So the FLSA protects that as well. The Equal Pay Act, which talks about equal pay for men and women with substantially similar work. We're going to talk about what that means and some of the nuances of the Equal Pay Act. You're probably most familiar with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, because you've probably heard about it throughout your lives. It's basically the big employment law that protects discrimination, and that includes pay discrimination based on your race, or your religion, or your sex, or your national origin. Inherent protected characteristics of what it protects. Executive Order 11246, which was passed in the mid-60s, prohibits federal contractors from discriminating from above. So Title VII kind of applies to all employers, and 1126 talks about federal contractors prohibiting the same type of discrimination. Again, some more ones that I at least want to make sure you're aware of. FMLA, the Family Medical and Leave Act, we talked about that last chapter, about what that, the 12 weeks of unpaid leave, that it protects you from that. Again, and then I listed a couple more here that have kind of give you some more ideas of what, of where we're protecting pay aspects. Some more recent ones, in 2002, you may have heard about the Sarbanes-Oxley, which basically says executives cannot retain bonuses or stock if they mislead the public. There was a lot of financial, shenanigans going on with some companies in the early 2000s where these companies were vastly over-reporting their earnings, and they were taking the stock and just keeping it. Well, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act now says that you can't keep it if it was obtained illegally. And finally, in 2009, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, employers are liable for pay loss resulting from discrimination. So basically, if your company's found to have violated discrimination laws and there are pay losses associated with that to the employee, you as a company are responsible for giving the employees back that money and even giving them more money than they were initially entitled to. That's what the Lilly Ledbetter Act is designed to prevent. All right, a little bit more in detail about some of the ones we just talked about, specifically the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act. Again, minimum wage and the hours of work are probably the big things here that I want you to realize. So any type of state minimum wage law is a result of the FLSA. Now, if you'll look, there is a federal pay level, so I think it's currently $7.25. I might be slightly, or $8.25. I might be slightly off there. But that is the rate that every worker in America is entitled to. a minimum wage. You know, there are a few exceptions, like if you're a restaurant employee who gets tips, you're exempted from that. But by and large, a minimum wage is the number that every employer in America has to pay. Well, each state can have their own minimum wage law so long as it's more than the federal. So, for example, if Oklahoma sets its at $10 an hour, that's okay because it's more than the federal. It just can't be less than the federal. And the FLSA protects that. FLSA also protects overtime to ensure certain employees, if you meet certain exemptions, you are entitled to overtime pay. So let's talk about those. Requires you pay 1.5 times standard for more than 40 hours a week. So if you make $10 an hour, for every hour that you work past 40, a time and a half would be $15 an hour. So you're guaranteed to get $15 an hour for any hour that you work past 40. And again, it's designed so that you don't take advantage of workers. And again, things have changed throughout time about what qualifies as an exempt position versus non-exempt. If you're in an exempt position, you are basically ineligible for overtime. So a lot of your managerial positions, you know, CFOs, directors, vice presidents, and then more of your professional types, so doctors, lawyers, teachers. Those types of professions are generally exempted from overtime. It doesn't matter how many hours you work, you get paid the same. And here are some examples of different exemptions that the FLSA looks at. And again, I'm not going to read every word here. I'll let you read them to yourselves. But just you kind of need to know what these exemptions are about how, if you fall under one of these buckets, so if you're under the executive exemption or the administrative exemption or here the professional exemption, these are things that you're able to, if you meet all of these little bullet points, then even if you make less than a certain amount of money, you're still going to be considered an exempt employee ineligible for overtime. And again, you can see here we have, there's actually an exemption for computer employees who meet certain IT requirements, outside sales, so if you're a traveling salesperson, and then other types of positions. But other than that, most positions are non-exempt. So, you know, any type of kind of restaurant worker, usually cooks, people who work in retail stores, you know, secretaries, you know, those types of jobs are generally considered to be non-exempt and are eligible for overtime. One of the big things that you probably have seen a lot in the news and for the last several years is about pay equity and pay discrimination. About, you know, there's still a lot of studies out there that show that women earn only about 75 to 80 cents for every dollar that a man earns. You know, and a lot of that is historical in nature, but a lot of it is, you know, a lot of employers historically haven't paid enough attention to making sure that men and women are paid comparable for comparable work. So a lot of these newer laws have been designed to kind of try to take care of that and make sure that there is pay equity within you know, our society. And again, I want to make it real clear between pay equity and pay equality. You know, what you hear a lot in the news is pay equality, which means that no matter what it is, men and women have to make the exact same amount of money, no matter what. That's equal, that's equality. Well, the government looks at it more from a pay equity standpoint. And what the equity means is that men and women should be paid equitably or comparably for similar work. But there are some exemptions that go along with that. So let's talk about what that looks like. Kind of the first effort to kind of figure this issue out was back in 1963 with the Equal Pay Act, which basically forbid discrimination on the basis of gender if you're performing basically equal work. So if you have a man and a woman, let's say they're both an attorney, both with a comparable skill set, background, work quality, you can't pay a man more than a woman just because he's a man. That's illegal. And that's what the Equal Pay Act was designed to do. However, with the Equal Pay Act, there are some factors for unequal pay. So, i.e., you can pay men and women differently if one of these things, you know, come into the equation. For example, shift differentials. So let's say a job is $10 an hour. Well, if you work from 9 to 5, you can pay that person $10 an hour. Well, if you want them to work from midnight to 8 a.m., which is a less popular shift, you can pay them $11 an hour because of a different shift. So that has been deemed to be acceptable. If it's part of a bona fide training program, so you know, any type of additional training or any additional skill sets or anything along those lines, if a man or a woman has more than the other sex, then you can use that as a reason to pay one more than the other. Differences based on ability, training, experience. So, if a female has a college degree and the male doesn't, you can pay her more because of her education. Or if the man has 25 years experience, but the woman only has 5 years of experience, you can use that as a reason as well. And it goes both ways for both men and women. So you can use experience, abilities, training as a reason to pay men and women differently. And then other reasons for business necessity. So, for example, if let's say you're recruiting for a Hollywood movie and you need a female in that role, you can kind of discriminate and say, I need a female for this role, so I cannot consider men for that role. That could be an example. Or like a women's prison, for example. There are certain aspects of a women's prison where you would need a woman to be able to perform that job. So that would be an example of another business necessity that's needed as a part of that. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is probably the one, like I said, you've seen quite a bit about. It's basically designed to prevent mistreatment based on protected characteristics, race, religion, national origin. And obviously, just from a pure hiring standpoint, it's relevant, but for our purposes here in this class, it also is used for pay purposes. So you can't intentionally pay, a Hispanic American less than an African American. You can't pay somebody who's Jewish more than somebody who's Roman Catholic. These are protected characteristics that are illegal to discriminate on, which includes pay. So that's really what I want you to know about Title VII for purposes of this class. Finally, for this chapter, obviously, as we've talked about all semester, compliance is a big part of what we're trying to do here in compensation total rewards. Compliance is a big part of trying to make sure that we're being fair and consistent. So I put this slide up to kind of show you what compliance professionals and compensation professionals do to make sure that they're still maintaining certain, they stay informed about what's going on in the law and different ways that they can make sure that they're not unintentionally discriminating in certain cases. So, great chapter, everyone. Again, I love this chapter. It's one of my favorites. We only have one chapter to go, so I'll see you next time.